Now we are starting the requirement engineering process in detail. Requirement engineering process. The process used for requirement engineering vary widely depending on the application domain, the people involved in the organization developing their requirements. This means requirement engineering process is not same for all types of applications. It varies. It varies and depend on the type of application, the scope of application, such as, for example, either the software will be developed as a whole package or in increments. Either the software is large in size or small in size, and the development team, it also depend on the people involved, such as development team and the stakeholder opinion about the requirements. Requirements such as cost, time, and design constraints also influences the requirement engineering process. So we cannot say the process is same. And also remember one thing, that we cannot say the particular process is wrong or not accurate. All the processes are accurate, but it depends on the suitability, that how much the particular technique or process is more suitable based on the circumstances. However, there are number of generic activities common to all these processes. First is elicitation, requirement elicitation, which is common. Requirement analysis, requirements validation, and requirements management. Now this is the generic spiral view of requirements engineering process. Here you can say, when you start the project, you do the feasibility test and you collect business requirement from the users. Business requirements are actually the business goals that customers want to achieve from the product, and then based on these business requirements, then apply techniques, the user requirements or the high level features are collected. In our last video, we have discussed in detail about the user requirements. So the user requirements are the high level features that are either for the users or that come from the customers. And then using different techniques such as prototyping, the system requirements are collected. So system requirements are the core requirements that can be either functional or non-functional requirements, and that belong to each user requirements. So above the user requirements, we have the this line for the system requirements elicitation and system requirements specification. So on different level, like if we start collecting system requirements, then system requirements are specified and we write these requirements. So documentation is involved in each level. Then we have the another phase after collecting all the system requirements, that is the validation phase. So we validate and verify all the collected requirements, and then we produce the end system requirement document. Now we start with the requirement elicitation. In simple words, requirement elicitation is a discovery of requirements. It is not necessary that we should discuss with the users or customer and we should collect those requirements. Requirements can be indirectly collected, or we can say the primary responsibility is to discover. So that can either involve stakeholder or that cannot involve the direct users or stakeholders. So it involves technical staff working with the customers to find out about the application domain in detail, the services that a system should provide, and the system operational constraints. So different types of constraints are already covered in our last lecture. So the primary responsibility of elicitation is to collect the user requirements, then system requirements, System requirements contain both functional requirements, non-functional requirement, and constraints. It may involve end users, managers, engineers involved in the maintenance, domain experts, trade unions, etc. etc. These are called stakeholders, and stakeholders are those who are either affected, like users, or who can affect. So the financial investors can also be the stakeholder, because with the quality product, the investor can be affected. Software engineers work with the range of system stakeholders to find out about the application domain, the services that system should provide, the required system performance, hardware constraints, other system, etc. Stages of elicitation include discovery of requirements, then classification of these requirements, and prioritization of requirements, and at the end the specification. Remember one thing, that prioritization means the rank order of requirements. So prioritization can be for the user requirements or can be for the functional or non-functional requirements. Functional and non-functional requirements are prioritized from perspective of development team, while the user requirements or high-level features are prioritized from the perspective of the users or customers. Why prioritization is important? Prioritization is important because the system can be deployed and developed in increments. So which increment should be implemented first? So again, it depends on the budget, cost, and time to deliver, because some features can be more important and urgently needed, and based on the business need, etc. requirements are prioritized, and we have a lot of techniques suggested, such as analytical hierarchy process and so on. Other techniques are also available for the prioritization of requirements, and it also depends on the size of requirements. If size of requirements are huge, then we then select and prefer proper prioritization techniques. Prioritization of requirement during elicitation is basically user requirement prioritization, and when the requirements are collected, so then we prioritize it from the system perspective, development team perspective. Problem: what are the basic problems with elicitation? Stakeholder don't know what they really want. They just can give you the idea, or they inform you about they need the application to make to produce easiness in their business and process, but they don't know the detailed requirements. So this is a big problem, and sometimes they don't they don't have the enough documents, etc. For example, if someone start his business from the scratch, so that become problem for you to collect. And if for example they start the business from the scratch, beside there is no quiet documents, and these types of users also don't have the knowledge of the requirements, so that become a challenge for you. Stakeholder express requirement in their own terms, in their own scenarios. They give you different user stories, and then become difficult for you to get the system requirements from that. Different stakeholders may have conflicting requirements. This is very much important and critical issue, that different stakeholders may be involved, and they have different approaches towards some requirements or other. Organizational and political factors may influence the system requirements. Yes, this is a problem. The requirement change during the analysis process. The requirement change is an important aspect of software development life cycle, and the requirement change over the time. So change can occur during elicitation and during the development process and after the deployment during the maintenance phase. So changes will occur, and changes can be occur due to several reasons, like technology change, business demands change, environmental factors are also involved here. So that become a problem to manage the changes in the requirement during elicitation. Requirement elicitation and analysis process. So this is the first step where requirements are discovered, and then requirements are classified, prioritized, and negotiated, and then specified, and then we discover it again. So discovery again is due to two reasons. Either we have missed some requirements specification document is incomplete, either not accurate, either some ambiguous terms are used, etc., etc. And another reason is the changes come in the requirement. So changes come in the requirement means we will update the specification document, and for that we will come to this phase again. Process activities: discovery of requirements, where we interact with the stakeholder to discover their requirements. Domain requirements are also discovered. Domain requirements include all the constraints also discovered at this stage. Requirements are classified, means groups are made. Groups related requirement, organize them into coherent clusters. Prioritization and negotiation, prioritizing requirements and resolving requirements conflicts. And specification, where requirements are documented. Requirement discovery is the process of gathering information about the required and existing systems and distilling the user and system requirements. This means we will filter those requirements. Interaction is with the system stakeholder, from managers to external regulators. Systems normally have a range of stakeholders. So remember one thing, that sometimes we develop the mobile application for the generic users. So a lot of this means a huge community involved here, and huge community will use that application. So that all comes in the stakeholders category. So we must have to include their opinion while discovering the best requirements and prioritization. Interviews are one of the basic technique. Formal or informal interviews with stakeholder are part of most requirement engineering process. Closed interviews, open interviews are two types. In closed interviews are based on a predetermined list of questions. You have set of predefined questions and then you ask from the different users or stakeholders, and they answer about it accordingly. And open interviews, where various issues are explored with the stakeholder during the interview. So both can be in a parallel. For example, you have set of questions and then you discuss with the clients. So at that time new question can be arises, and new conflicts issues can be arises. So then it become close and open in parallel. Effective interview: be open-minded, avoid preconceived ideas about the requirements, and are willing to listen to stakeholder. Prompt the interviewer to get discussion going using a springboard question, requirements proposal, or by working together on a prototype system. So prototyping is also a good approach, where you design a prototype, either it can be static prototype or dynamic, and it is also discussed in the previous lecture. And through that you negotiate with the customers. Problem interviews: application specialist may use language to describe their work that is not easy for the requirement engineer to understand, and the problem is more critical when there exist differences in languages. Interviews are not good for understanding domain requirement. That is another problem. Requirement engineers cannot understand specific domain technology. Some domain knowledge is so familiar that people find it hard to articulate or think that it is not worth articulating. Ethnography is another way of discovering requirements. A social scientist spends a considerable time observing and analyzing how people actually work. So you go, you observe their culture of dealing, you and their work, etc. So people do not have to explain and articulate their work, rather you observe from their actions, from their way of thinking and way of doing something. Social and organizational factors of importance may be observed. Ethnographic studies have shown that work is usually richer and more complex than suggested by simple system model. Stories and scenarios play a big role while discovering requirements. Scenarios and user stories are real example of how system can be used. Stories and scenarios are description. This means the user of the system or stakeholder give you stories, describe their work, describe their business, describe their process, and you then get the user requirements, core features of the system from that scenarios. So the scenarios can be lengthy as much, but you have to discover the specific requirement from that scenarios, and then you negotiate with them. Because they are based on the practical situation, stakeholders can relate to them and can comment on their situation with respect to the story. Scenario is a structured form of user story. Scenarios should include description of starting situation, description of normal flow of events throughout their process of business, a description of what can go wrong, information about their concurrent activities, a description of state when the scenarios finish. So from start to end, all the process they want to be achieved from the software should be covered in that scenario. So that was all about the requirement elicitation. So hope you enjoyed. Next